Welcome to American Medieval, a podcast about the fact that if the United States has never been truly modern, it's probably because we've always been a little bit medieval. I'm your host, Professor Matthew Gabriele, and I've been researching, teaching, and talking about the Middle Ages, well, to anyone who will listen at least, for more than 3 decades. Each week on the show, we'll be joined by an expert scholar who'll share their fascination with, and sometimes their revulsion by, both the medieval world itself as well as the ways the historical period has been remembered and used right here in the USA. All right. Hi, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of American Medieval. I'm, of course, Professor Matthew Gabriele, and we have a special treat here on American Medieval this month and for coming months, hopefully far into the future, is that what we decided here on the podcast is that there's a lot of medieval kind of in the news, but because of the kind of the turnaround that we have with the podcast and the editing and all the care that we want to put into producing the podcast, is that oftentimes we don't have an opportunity to talk about things kind of as they're happening. So what we decided to do is that every month I would get together some of my friends, some of my best friends here who like to yell about things online just as much as I do, and we would talk about kind of the medieval in the news. And so I've assembled a crack team. And the crack team is, they're the regular guests on American Medieval. You will recognize the names. First of all, David Perry, my co-author and friend, who works at the University of Minnesota, and Thomas Lecaque, who has been on American Medieval, who's been a friend for a long time, who works at Grandview University. So first of all, Thomas and David, thank you for going on this adventure with me here today. I don't know what's going to happen. We're going to kind of find out. But also, I will take full responsibility at the beginning if it's a total disaster. This is entirely not your fault. So thank you guys for joining me here.
Well, that's fantastic. I love all the half a share of the praise and zero blame. I accept your offer.
Okay. You should be so lucky most of the time.
That's right. I mean, I'm just kind of used to accepting blame nowadays, so it's totally fine. Maybe it's the academic in me at my particular university, but we don't need to go into that right now. Anyway, so there's a whole slate of things that I think we decided that we might want to talk about, and I don't know how much we'll get to because there's a whole lot there. But one of the things I kind of wanted to start with is that recently there was an archaeological discovery, and I think this is really important because a lot of times people seem to think that the raw material that we're dealing with when we're studying the medieval past is kind of set, that everything is out there, has already been discovered. And that's just simply not true. There are new archaeological finds kind of coming fast and furious. There's also new archives, new sources, and stuff like that. But this one kind of popped up because a group of Danish archaeologists were doing a dig, and under a car park, they discovered a medieval convent. Now, for some reason, these things tend to be under car parks, parking lots for some reason. I mean, Richard III, of course, back in the day was discovered there as well. But I think one of the really interesting things, too, is that there are still digs kind of going on. And how do you guys kind of deal with this in your own teaching and research when the fact that there is new kind of material kind of coming available?
I think the most important thing in my teaching is to have people understand that the Middle Ages aren't set, that the knowledge isn't set, that I'm not just taking a body of knowledge and figuring out what's important and distilling it, but that it's an ongoing field. And the more complicated way to do that is to talk about new interpretation, where that history, and I use history always very broadly, not to say history departments, although all of us are historians in that sense, but people studying the past in all these different ways are coming up with new thoughts, are reading things in new ways, are connecting things. And so that's actually kind of complicated, right? That's maybe an upper division place to get to history's interpretation, though I try to bring it in at all levels. When people just find new stuff, that's a much sort of clearer story to be told, right?
Yeah.
That there's just new things being discovered all the time. And then it allows us to move into places where we talk about new things being discovered 10 years ago or 50 years ago or 100 years ago, and the ways and some of the randomness of what survives, but also that this is an ongoing, all disciplines. We are discovering new information, and that's really exciting.
Absolutely. And I think one of the things too that's interesting, at least from my perspective, is that, it's not necessarily that there is that we didn't know that this convent existed. Like people knew that this convent existed. Like there were written sources that kind of told us about it, but we didn't know specifically where it is. And so it's really that kind of fusion, which, you and I and Thomas, of course, has talked about as well, that kind of fusion of different disciplines kind of coming together that could really lead to some really interesting new insights about the period.
I think a lot of it is we like to think of the Middle Ages has this very particular image in people's heads, even if they don't know anything about it. And so if something survives, we assume it's castle, right? Some remnant, it is castle.
That's
if
right.
it's not castle, it is church.
Yeah.
And you can see it, and it's there, and it's just on the surface, and whatever. And anything that is not either castle or surface level church, people, I think it's far long enough ago that people get really easy, we just don't know where it is, and it's lost, and it'll always be lost. And it's really cool how much we can get from the bits and pieces that remain. But I don't know, it doesn't happen that often that we find things that stir the public imagination. And the reason it's fun when it's in a car park or a sports field or something like that is that these are places where you never think about. I never think about history when I am parking my car in the middle of the city. I usually think about the future and how late I am. Yeah. Right. When I'm at a sports field, I'm really thinking in the now. And sometimes I'm thinking a little bit, is this going to end? And am I going to ever get out of here? You don't think necessarily the past. And so it's these kind of super boring quotidian places that are something like, oh, there's also a dead king under here. Or, also, welcome. You're in the middle of the convent that we're now going to excavate as we're redoing. I think the images, it's a youth soccer field or something. These are really normal places that all of a sudden are also historic relics tying your town into a deeper history. I think that's really cool. Archaeology is fun in general because students know nothing about archaeology as an actual science, but love the concept of archaeology. And I think that's really great. And so archaeological finds tend to be really exciting in a survey class and be like, hey, this is a new news item. Look at this cool thing. They may lean a little more Indiana Jones than what we want by the time we get to the end of the semester, but there's never a wrong time.
We've all been
finding
there.
Cool stuff and punching Nazis are both what a job.
Yeah.
Thomas, I always think of you and Harrison Ford in the same headspace. So,
I desperately wish that were true. I aspire to his levels of not caring about things that don't actually matter.
It's good to have those sorts. The other thing that I want to say is, and this is not a criticism of anyone involved, but it's also true that archaeology gets news coverage in ways that new interpretations of new interpretations of pre-existing tests, or even historians actually going in the archives and finding new things and doing the work that we do. There is no section in the news media for that unless we literally discover a text, because then that places us back kind of on the archaeology side. And I think that's something that we all have to reckon with, is what creates news, and then what does that mean for us in our disciplines? And it's not to let the tail wag the dog if the tail is the news industry, but it's definitely to be really aware that digging stuff up creates news cycles. So we need to think about what that means. And I bet over time we'll come back to that theme. We don't have to do it all today, but it's definitely on my mind all the time.
Do you think that's because archaeology is kind of coded as science?
Yeah, it's 100% because coded as science. And also, literally digging something up is news, right? In terms of, it's easy to explain to anyone why this thing is news. And I think a lot about the people in the news industry. When I talked, I just wrote a book about public scholarship, and I very early on say, you got to see the world through the perspective of the people sitting around the table at CNN talking about what they need to put on their website in the next hour. These are the people, right? So you dig something up, it's news. You pull a sword out of the sea, it's news. But also there are science sections. So anything coded as science, there is a journalist ready. In Minnesota, there are journalists ready I'm in Minnesota, to respond to stories that someone caught a big fish, right? That's their job. And I'm jealous of their job. I'm jealous of the job. She's great. But I'm jealous of the job, right? But there's not someone who's ready to cover something very different, right? So there are science reporters ready to cover archaeology, and archaeology is cool, and digging something up is news. And that's very different than what I think all three of us have done in archives.
I think I have solved the history news problem, because what we're going to do is we're just going to make a bunch of videos of me burying books and then people digging them up and saying like, look what I found.
Your librarians will be very excited for that, I'm sure.
They will be, yeah. Well, I mean, there's churn and stuff like that, so it'll be fine. So we'll do it with old books which belong in the ground. So, yeah.
The problem is what you're saying is exactly the thing we criticize whenever a book claims to have discovered a new thing, or this is the first book to ever do X. And the problem is that both that's terribly wrong and we hate it, but also those are the only books we hear about because they're doing it.
Because they're doing the thing.
19th century explorer mentality. I have found thing.
Yeah.
So the rock art wall in Colombia that the National Geographic brought a bunch of people. It's like, oh my God, we have just discovered this thing from 12,000 years of history that they discovered because there were published articles from the local university in a Spanish language academic journal that they read and then went out to see it too.
Yeah.
But it's we have discovered, and in this case, they did discover. They actually did. They discovered the monastery. We just, even if you bury the books, you will have to then say this book has revolutionized field X.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think we start with burying books, and let's just see where it goes, because I'm really excited about this idea. I got a big yard. It'll be that's where we start, and we'll just kind of see what happens from there. So,
can we bury unread emails? Is that a thing we do? Because then we could just lose them. I don't need a news story. We could just lose that to the ages.
I think you could do that just by selecting all and hitting delete. I think that works very well. I know David is a big advocate for that as well, and has been publicly for a while. So
yep, Monday morning, wake up, select all. Well, Friday afternoon, wake up, select all. Wake up Friday afternoon. I don't know. At any time, select all unread, hit delete, just move forward. Just keep moving forward. If it's important, they'll get back to you.
That's
and
right.
Anyone who's listening to this and has been wondering why I haven't responded to them, now you know. I don't know the difference between Monday or Friday. I don't know afternoon. I wake up whenever I wake up, and I delete your emails. So there we are.
And delete. That's right. So the other thing I'm wondering too about, going back to the actual kind of convent discovery, and I was struck by something you said, Thomas, is about I'm wondering too if there's something about the medieval and the fact that we expect in some ways ancient stuff to be in the ground or in ruins or something like that. Modern stuff, like you were saying, is above ground and here, but the medieval occupies that kind of liminal space in which we don't really know what to do with it. It seems like it should be above ground because we think of chart or castle, as you said, right? But the idea that there's stuff that's not there still, just kind of confounds our brain. And so when things are discovered, that does seem to hit the news a little bit differently. I mean, so it has something to do with the Middle Ages kind of in the popular imagination generally, or?
I also think the popular conception of the Middle Ages doesn't treat them as a real space in the way that we treat the ancient world as a real space.
Oh, sure. Okay.
I think we expect that the Roman Empire is real and concrete and important, and we will find Romanitas, right? We will find ancient Greek, we will find ancient Egyptian, because we accept it's really, really long ago, but it was really important. And I mean, the Renaissance wins the cultural war against the Middle Ages. That's why we call them the Middle Ages. But it also means that we always jump back to still, to this day, Rome and other classical things are really meaningful and important, and we will find them because they're there to be discovered. We're not looking for medieval things underground. If medieval things survive, that's really cool. But as a society, we're not
actively searching it out.
We're not actively searching for it. This is not important enough for us to look for more as a collective body. So when we find them, that's cool, but we were never looking for it. And so the fact that you can lose one of the 5 royal monasteries in Roskilde and you didn't find it until now is fascinating, because if you knew that there were, ancient Roman temples, somebody would have dug up something to look for them by this point. People get very excited about a distant past more than they are with a more recent past.
Yeah. I mean, there's still a king of Denmark. They would think you would keep track of your royal monasteries. There's literally still a king, right?
If it mattered.
But if it mattered, that's right. If it mattered. So, yeah.
And I think monasteries end up, especially in what are now Protestant countries, end up in a weird space where your church is part of your national heritage if it's big and fancy. Like a cathedral is still part of a national heritage because you probably repurposed it as a Protestant church. I mean, there is a state church in Denmark. A monastery is a very different thing because it's a part of the heritage that is specifically tied to a religious tradition.
Yeah. Yeah. So it seems like more, and maybe this is kind of a segue to some of the other stuff that we wanted to talk about, is that the Middle Ages are more of a place that you can visit conceptually. And this is why we have so much stuff about like, oh, this is just like, we going back to the Middle Ages. Like there was a piece in CNN that you're living in medieval times. It was talking about kind of health policies and RFK Jr. and kind of Maha and stuff like that. But then also, too, a really neat kind of experiment by a medieval lit PhD student who was experimenting like with second sleep. So, and David, you pointed out the second sleep one. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. So, I mean, I don't know all the details, though. I'm sort of eager to learn more. But there's a graduate student. I'm just looking it up to make sure I have exactly the right information. Anna Fox, who's at North Carolina, has been doing online, I think on Instagram, though maybe TikTok too, maybe all the platforms, I don't know, has been performing second sleep experiments. So in the Middle Ages, the standard sort of narrative about sleep, the expectation is that you would sleep for 4.5 hours, half the night. You'd wake up, you'd have a meal, you'd go to the bathroom, maybe you have sex, you let a little time pass, then you fall back asleep again. And that's sort of the expectation. I don't know how true that is. I mean, I know that medieval medical manuals talk about it. I know that surely some people practiced it. When I've looked at sort of monastic schedules, they don't have a lot of sleep, right? There's late night prayer and early morning prayer, and then there is some sleeping time. I've always assumed there was a lot of napping, but maybe that's because I'm getting older and enjoy my naps very much. But I also like to wake up really, really early and go fishing. So, with proper motivation.
Mm-hmm.
But I do think that what I like about it, I mean, I think it's, first of all, the texts exist that talk about this, and the graduate student is working with them and performing it online and talking about it. And I think that's great. I think that, I mean, for me, I think that's great. And there was a pretty good article, I think, in the Atlantic a few years ago that was also about this idea of medieval sleep, having first sleep and second sleep. And again, but just anything that makes us question stuff about today that we assume, like 8-hour sleep, 10-hour sleep, that is good. If you don't get that, you're doing it wrong, I think is great. On the other hand, if then people read it and say, well, that, if what we've been told about a good night's sleep is wrong, maybe what we've been told about vaccines is also wrong. And that's not the graduate student's responsibility. That's talking more about sort of the Maha people are getting medieval, right? So it's complicated. And I guess the real thing is that if it's coming from a place of expertise, as it is with the online social media video sleep experience, that's great. And that if it's not coming from expertise, but just sort of vibes about the past, that is less great.
Yeah. No, and I think that's part of the fun thing for me about the sleep thing is about she's doing it because she wanted to try it and she found some value in it and she thought it was really interesting. And she had, she said kind of repeatedly, I think in some of the TikToks that I was able to watch her, that the reels, I don't know if it was specifically, it's probably on both, but is that she enjoyed that time. Like it was a bit of quietude for her. It's the world is still because everybody else is asleep. I think she actually like read by candlelight, like to kind of, complete the vibe, which was, kind of really neat and aesthetic. And then she just kind of had fun with it. Like, and she's not advocating, she's not saying like, I need to enforce this on people, but like you were saying, it's a different way of thinking about the world and our relationship to the world, and that people have lived differently and we can understand how they lived differently in the past.
And I think fun recreation studies is great. I think that you can take it too far, but to not, I mean, I had an undergraduate, he's like, we're going to put on mail, and what we'd like to do is walk, I don't know, somewhere in Europe where I don't even remember what battle he wants. We can't do that. So we're going to put on mail. We're going to walk the same distance, but in upstate Minnesota. And I'm like, this is great. Have a great time. And you will learn something about what the experience was like to walk for 5 days in medieval armor, carrying a medieval, the equivalent of weight of medieval gear. You will learn something that I don't know, that I have never experienced in my body, and I'm excited to hear what you learn. I think there's lots of examples like this, and that it's a good way to engage the past. And again, it can create news, it can create vibes, it can create fun, and it can go too far the minute people use it to undermine what we do actually know.
Yeah.
This is the good part. This is the building Gwydion Castle part.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Let's try a thing to see what it would be like. Not now all of us need to live in authentically recreated 13th century castles because this is the way we are true manly men.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it seems really kind of fantastic. But then there is the other side, right? And this goes to the CNN article, which talked to some medieval historians about kind of medical history, which we know a lot about kind of medieval medicine, but some of that is again kind of based on vibes, is what people think that the world was like in the past, and they don't want expertise between them and those particular vibes, a purer, simpler thing that there's a connection to the earth or something like that. And it's just like the thing I always joke about, but I'm not actually joking, like when I talk to my students, is like, do you know what like medieval peasants would have liked more than anything else? Vaccines.
Yeah.
Because they didn't want their children to die all the time. Right?
Yeah.
Like that's the kind of fundamental thing that we're dealing with here. So
the entire time I was reading that article, I kept getting mad on behalf of fictional 14th century people that I don't know. Right? Because like one of the aftermath effects of the Black Death is like large scale alchemy gets rejected because no, I didn't die of the plague. I died of the mercury or white lead you fed me. Let's not do that ever again.
Yeah.
And the idea that we're returning to the Middle Ages by going back to what if I, snort crushed up crystals or something. If people in the Middle Ages had access to better information, they did better things.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's because when you actually have generations of just death from everything, the number of kings who John Comnenus II scratches himself on a dirty arrow and dies of blood poisoning because there are no antibiotics. Okay, cool. Let's go back to raw milk. I have a hard time with the belief that this is in any way something that is not just incredibly unfair to people in the Middle Ages who would have loved to not die of everything.
Not dying was one of their favorite things, I think. I think I can safely say that.
Be ours. This should be
it should be. It should be. There should be some kind of continuity there. Absolutely. So, but I think like that there's and this is something all of us have kind of talked about, is the way that there's this kind of evocation of tradition, right, which is entirely invented, in which to give what is really kind of a weird kind of modern conceit some sort of credibility, in which you can't, like, it's so deeply anti-science, but in an incredibly modern vein, right? Like it's a way of kind of circumventing the argument about what actually works in the case of medicine and what doesn't, by using the medieval as a crutch, isn't it?
I think I think I learned this from you, really. I think it was you talking at the University of Tennessee that like started me thinking about just like the idea of how powerful nostalgia is and how little it has to do with history.
Mm.
But it's evoking tradition, and the further back you can go, the longer your roots are. But they don't care that's Middle Ages, right? It's the same thing with like the tradwife thing, where it's like, this is what pioneers did. Have you heard about the Anne Hathaway movie that's coming out about the tradwife influencer who gets thrown back into the 19th century and has to live in the time period she's cosplaying?
Oh, the viral book that's Yesteryear, which is
I haven't read the book.
Yeah.
Maybe I will.
It's based on the book. Yeah.
Okay,
Mm-hmm.
I love this as a concept because it really is the part that you have this idea of the Middle Ages, like, yes, we should go back to this pure, earthy, you will die of everything. That first cold you get, you're in real trouble.
Yeah.
No one wants that. They just have images of a past they like to believe in.
Yeah. But it comes from a position of safety, right? Because they have access to all of the conceits that, they can drink raw milk, but if they get really sick, like they can go to hospital, right?
Yes.
Like, or something like that, right?
I think it also does come from a position of fear of modernity, of actually bad shit that's happening, right? Like there are bad things that are happening. The pharmaceutical industry is terrible, right? Our healthcare systems are terrible. Our tech overlords are terrible. And so, but the response to that, of course, is not to then retreat to this nostalgic imaginary past, which loads on all these other things. But I do think, so I am, as you two know, but maybe not all the listeners know, I'm the father of a boy with Down syndrome, and that has sort of plunged me now for 19 years into the disability world. And I think a lot about the anti-vax movement among parents like me, who enter that movement early in their child's life, shortly after diagnosis, in a moment of incredible vulnerability and fear, in which they don't necessarily feel like the contemporary systems are supporting them or explaining what's going on. And I'm very sympathetic to that. I'm not sympathetic to the people who exploit that, right? I'm not sympathetic to the people who profit off that. But I am sympathetic to that moment of fear. And I do think that moment of fear becomes breeding ground for nostalgia, for really toxic nostalgia.
Yeah. No, and I think that I like what you guys are saying about kind of this rejection of modernity, right? But that there's an evocation. The medieval's always there to kind of pull from. And again, it doesn't necessarily have to do with anything about the past, but that's kind of where it lives. It doesn't live underground, like it's living with us, like to bring kind of those two threads together, like in this. It can coexist with us at the same time. Like we seem to be able to kind of pull threads from it. And this is something that scholars of medievalism have been talking about for a long time. It's about it being kind of an intellectual conceit about that there are no hard and fast boundaries that separate modernity from the Middle Ages. And we can kind of access that by traveling. During the era of colonialism, you could travel to a different country, right? And it would be backwards. It would be medieval or something like that. We still talk about the Middle East and Africa that way. Well, some people do. But really, it can kind of coexist with us here.
I hope we don't, but yes, some people do.
We better not. So otherwise, that would be really terrible. So though we all kind of work on or have worked on the Crusades, and certainly people do talk in that way about even scholars sometimes, unfortunately. Wow If True is your one-stop internet culture shop, explaining how what's happening online shapes the real world. Real-life besties, tech culture journalist Amanda Silberling, and science fiction author/attorney Isabel J. Kim Esquire, author of Sublimation, out now, go buy it, break it all down for you. They're asking and answering your burning questions about the internet. Why are the edgelord tech bros literally everywhere, even in the White House? Are the AI overlords coming to take our jobs? And if so, why are they so awful at playing Pokemon? That's actually a good question. All right, anyway, so check out Wow If True, wherever on the internet you find your podcast. New episodes every other Wednesday. One of the things I was going to mention too is that's really interesting is that it doesn't always, because there's another thread that David you kind of picked up on, and we were talking a little bit about kind of before we started recording, is that there's another way that resistance to modernity can be evoked using the medieval, and that's related to technology. Right, is that there is this kind of forward-facing kind of techno futurism, which is also techno-feudalism somehow. I don't really understand that. But then there's a callback to anybody who stops kind of the progress of modernity is a Luddite, is backwards thinking, is medieval. So it can be leveraged sometimes by the same people as kind of both a positive and a negative. And so like, what do you think? Like, do you guys have any thoughts kind of about that, or kind of what's going on there? And more specifically, like I'm talking about kind of the printing press AI kind of analogy that we were talking about earlier.
Yeah. So just for people who haven't been following my latest shouting on Blue Sky, and of course, when this goes on, I'll have shouted about 85 more things before this goes on air. But there has been for, I think, at least 2 years. I can't say that I've tracked it from the beginning. When anyone there's a narrative from proponents of AI, and AI is a very loose term on purpose, but we're just going to say AI right now, because it's not just proponents of large language models or whatever. It's proponents of AI as this concept. Whenever they encounter pushback, one of the responses is to say, this is just like when those reactionary religious medieval authorities, particularly the church or monks or universities, but always religious, but possibly kings in support of reactionary, sort of backwards Catholic medievalism, demonized the printing press. That the printing press came, and of course, we all know, we being today, that the printing press was good, that printed books are good, that's a good thing 500 years later. And so those 15th century overlords, bishops, monks, kings, popes, university leaders who attacked the printing press, they were wrong, and you, O critic of AI, are also wrong. And so there's a lot of things to say there, but one of them is that didn't happen. Like, that is not actually the thing that whatever else we want to talk about with Luddites, who of course are early modern, or with contemporary pushback against AI and machine learning, the thing they're describing about that happened in the Middle Ages in the 15th century is not a thing that happened. It just didn't happen. You know what happened when the printing press was invented? Church leaders said, oh, this will be great. We can standardize our texts and share them. Let's get involved. Were there individuals who didn't like printing? Yes. Were there people worried about printing? Yes. But this idea that 15th century and 16th century people like Martin Luther said, printing will democratize knowledge. And the church said, oh, we don't want that. We better stop it. That is just not a thing that happened. That is not the history. And so, like, I don't know what else to say other than it didn't happen. But then we get into this conversation. And I was just before this meeting, I was sort of surfing pro AI. This meeting, I mean, us all logging on and recording this. I was surfing sort of pro AI discussions of the printing press. And there are just a lot of them that say, and this is a thing that happened. And it's not AI hallucination. It's just people believing it happened. And so writing it down, there's no citation, or if there is, it's describing one incident of some random person who didn't like printing, which again, there were people who didn't like printing. There are people who don't like everything. There are people who don't like kittens. There are people who don't like the Red Sox. I don't know why, but there are people who don't like things, and that's fine. And they sometimes talk about it. But yeah, anyway, it didn't happen. Universities, they said, oh, printing is great. That's nice. Illuminators said, oh, can we print? I was just talking to my friend Kathleen, who's saying, yeah, they tried to print on gold leaf because it was cool. Did they, they took books, they printed them, and then they illustrated them like they would manuscript. There was no, oh, we can't abandon the scroll or the handwritten book. That would be terrible. Like, that is not how technology works. And so this modern analogy by these proponents of AI is infuriating because it didn't happen, but also fascinating to watch.
It's also, these are the same people who then tell you that you don't need to read a book. You can have ChatGPT tell you the plot summary of it at the same time. Yeah. So what are we even talking about?
Yeah.
No, I think the escalation of David's voice throughout his like it was becoming increasingly, it was really great. The other thing too, which I think is so fascinating, is like when they use that analogy, is like what they're failing to understand is that the way that the kind of most adamant proponents of AI usage is they want a universal use, right? That like they're saying like you just need to use this kind of for everything. And when they're using the printing press analogy, is like as David said, like the history complicates that because people used it for lots of different things, and some people didn't use it because they didn't find it useful, and other people tried to do other things with it and they found it useful, and some people decided it didn't work for them, and some people thought like, no, this is really great, let's continue to use it. But it was allowed to kind of take root and in different communities kind of in different ways. And part of that is because of the way that it's controlled and the kind of capital behind this and who's being pushed to it, and also it's part of a political project now and going on. But again, like the kind of most superficial encounter with the actual past, like just destroys their analogy in this way.
Yeah.
The universal use is the biggest problem, because I was in the archives this summer and I'm working on an 18th century topic now, but like there are manuscript books still.
Yeah,
being created in like the 1760s in monastic houses alongside a huge number of printed texts, because you can have both at all times. And the problem with it is that what it usually comes down to, at least the way I experience it, I don't know about you guys, is that if I am not teaching my students how to use AI to write about history, am I failing them?
No.
For life. No, I'm not.
I just want to put on the record,
learn how to read, learn how to write yourself. And the people I know who hate AI the most aren't actually professors who are just like, I'm just not using it and we've moved on. It's people who work in corporate jobs where they're required by their bosses to use it for tasks that don't help because their bosses don't know what they do, but are convinced that AI will solve their problems, except AI won't do the like 3 things they need to do. Like if you could convert this spreadsheet into a Word document without screwing it up, that'd be cool, but you can't. What you can do is write a crappier version of the emails I have to write myself anyway.
Mm-hmm.
The idea that all technology is good at all times and everything is a teleological progress towards, I mean, I guess not revelation anymore, but like the tech singularity where we have become one with the hive mind. Like every so often I will listen to some tech bro talk about the future and like the mystical future and not a future that we could actually achieve, where like healthcare is universal and you could be taken care of properly by the government that you pay taxes to. It's the I could ascend to godhood. Did you ever play the video game Deus Ex?
I did.
Back in the 90s?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Do you like half the time I listen to these people talk is like, I've blown up the building you're in after hacking your mechs. Are we? No?
I mean,
sometimes
we were all in grad school when that game came out. So
listen, I am a child. I'm aware of that. I am a very old child. It's fine.
I'm just pretty sure that was, that was my third year of grad school, which was a tough year, but good for gaming. So, yeah.
Yeah. No, we should be very clear. Thomas is much younger than us old folks, over here. So, it was probably, you were like what, in like grade school or something like that when that was happening. Douglas?
I was born in 85.
Okay. You're not that much younger. That's okay. You got a few years for us. No, but I think that but that recourse to kind of the analogy is that, so again, like medieval and these are oftentimes some of the same people, right? Like, and I'm thinking like, I don't need to name anybody kind of right now, but the kind of the political right in this country that thinks that we can commune with nature for our health and just eat, beef tallow, straight from the, the bone or something like that. But then at the same time, like use AI for everything. And if you don't want to do that, then you're medieval, right? Like there seems to be a weird disconnect in like, I just wonder that there's not a lot of logical consistency in these positions. I think that's what I'm saying, guys.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
And I always just want to go, as I did in my rant, I just want to start, actually, let's look at what the history is. Oh, yeah. Well, these people, they were really looking for a thing that became antibiotics and vaccines. They didn't know yet. They were trying to figure out how contagion, how infection, how these things worked, and doing the best they could. And they were looking for progress. And we can see that in the text. We can talk about it, right? That there was, and when it comes to something like, there were no medieval scribes who thought, oh, printing is going to put me out of a job, right? Yeah. There was it. Which is often the analogy. The church was never saying we can't have printing or people will know things. And that again was just not, that we can just do a lot by just saying, let's look at the text in the 15th century, in the 14th century, or whatever century. And let's just talk about what was actually there. Okay. Does your analogy hold up? No. Next. But there's also this broader question of sort of, there's no need to be coherent and consistent in sort of a nostalgic fantasy you're using in the moment. That's just not, and I do think it does fall, there's a tendency among the political left to get really excited pointing out hypocrisy and inconsistency on the right, and I am totally guilty of that, but it has no impact. Like that is not a thing that actually really works.
Yeah. But I think the evocation, or at least the way that we as academics, as scholars in a public space, like if we do that kind of education, it at least gets to the next question. Okay, so your analogy is bad. So why are they making it? Because I think people get hung up on, is the analogy correct or not? And think that's the end of the conversation, when it really seems to be more important. Like, okay, why are they making that analogy? Why are they evoking the Middle Ages in this particular way at this particular moment? Just to stay with kind of our period, because, they're trying to do something here and now and convince something or convince a population of a certain thing and to act in a certain way by pulling on that past.
And I think that's why you can do both versions of it, right? The negative Middle Ages is one where you have the Catholic Church, if you're in a Protestant country or Protestant society, where the Catholic Church hates learning and God bless the Reformation, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. People were superstitious and backwards and oppressed. And then at the same time, they really love the Middle Ages for a narrative of, oh, the beautiful, pristine, all-white Europe with no immigrants, where manly men of faith killed people who disagreed with them. If we want to blend it into the next things we talking about.
Yeah.
Because I do think both of these parts go together in the utility of it, right? It is the idea that it had to be backwards because it was oppressed by the wrong people who were influenced by whatever you want some, but also the good, pure core of what Euro-American whiteness should look like is also a fake nostalgia about Middle Ages that never existed that you then impose on everyone.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think we see that too. And something else I wanted to kind of bring up as we're running not toward the end, but towards the end, of our time together, just for this month, is the evocation of the crusade, which is something all three of us have talked very extensively about, written lots about in various ways. Because there are two things, and I think they're kind of related, though they're not necessarily directly connected, but they seem to be part of the same kind of movement, right? Is that the Department of Defense has kind of transitioned to a different type of educational model for their on-school bases, in which they're evoking this kind of classical educational system, which is kind of a right-wing alternative, initially to the AP, but it's spreading to other things using a textbook that is very laudatory towards the kind of martial nature of the Middle Ages, Christendom defending itself, very Islamophobic too in its outlook, in its description of medieval Islam, but then also a really racist neo-Nazi rally that was explicitly called a Christian Crusader rally that happened in Dearborn, Michigan, which is a predominantly Islamic American community just outside of, not far from Detroit, I should say. So what are your guys' thoughts on kind of the evocation of the Crusades here? And I know you have lots, but it does seem to be kind of like it's increasing in intensity. It seems to be like the Crusades are back with a vengeance in the political right.
Yeah, and it's amazing to me because I think all three of us started really talking about this during the war in Iraq, and looking at this and in the early 2000s, and it was bad, and it is just a lot worse. It is just a lot worse.
Yes.
It is an order of magnitude worse. And the normalization of anti-Muslim rhetoric, anti-Muslim American rhetoric,
yes,
in the American right, and then the use of crusade images is one of the dominant metaphors. I think. I mean, it has to concern every. I've been saying this for a long time, but it's only more true. Every professional medievalist needs to be aware of this and think about it and think about how it impacts their teaching, and their writing, and engage with it as possible. But it is intensifying in really troubling ways. And I do, so what does that mean to us other than to try to write good essays and good books and put that information out there? I'm not sure. But I do think, I mean, there's the guy, Andy Ogles, who just lost in Tennessee, but who is just posting the most explicit Crusader rhetoric I've seen in a long time. And then I'm about 15 miles maybe from Forest Lake, the home of Pete Hegseth, where he grew up, and in Minnesota. And, he of course is leading the nation's Defense Department with Crusader images on his body and Crusader rhetoric in his mouth. And it's, to see it flash up in this kind of way against in Dearborn is extremely troubling. I guess the one other thing I want to say really quickly, speaking as an American Jew, is that a lot of it is being done in my name. That we have become an excuse for American Christians to say violent things about American Muslims. And I don't think that, I mean, I think it's wrong, but I also don't think it ends well for American Jews either, because we are not, in fact, going to be ultimately on the side of that kind of movement.
Yeah. Just very briefly, too, I want to tie in something before, Thomas, I know you're going to say something, but is the use of AI as well. Is that Ogles, Hegseth, and other people, all of this is, a lot of their anti-Islamic rhetoric is AI slop of crusaders or themselves as crusaders or something like that. So that kind of ties in something else we were just talking about again. Sorry, Thomas, go ahead.
You guys have both read Kathleen Bellew's Bring the War Home, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think about this all the time because this is, her book starts from the premise that one of the things that really impacts the white power movement in the United States in the 70s and 80s is the Vietnam War and people coming home with the kind of disillusionment with the government. I think a lot of the contemporary moment is that same movement of people who in the 90s and 2000s go to war for what they think are patriotic ideas, because we never, as a country, ever deal with the kind of aftermath of the rampant and violent and unending Islamophobia of post 9/11, and then come home and want to bring their war home with them. And I think of people like Matt Shea, who was a state senator in Washington State and got effectively fired after writing a biblical basis for warfare, where he was planning on we have to kill all of the unbelievers, which means anyone who believed in his sect of Christianity. He is out of politics, but still runs mega churches in the Pacific Northwest. the sons of his youth pastor at his church were arrested in Coeur d'Alene with Patriot Front 2 summers ago. Like these people are all still around and active. Hegseth goes off to war and doesn't get to kill enough Muslims and wants to do it again. Right? We're at war with Iran because these are people whose post 9/11 dreams of violence are thwarted by the realities of being grown up to live in the war, who draw on a nostalgic space of the Crusades to give a metric for continuing to go on and do this violence. Yeah. The guy who was holding the preacher outside Dearborn, who's holding the Make Crusades Great Again and leading the rally, is wearing civilian clothing, but with a bulletproof vest, so it looks like he's wearing desert camo.
Yep.
In Dearborn, Michigan, these are people who are playing with a very specific idea. And the textbook stuff that the DoD is doing, Hillsdale is also responsible for the framework of Florida's new, they call it their FACT test. It's the Florida Advanced Course in Testing. It's their equivalent. They want to replace the AP. I have now read not only their entire framework, but I've read the textbook they're using, and it's the exact same kind of thing. It's an American history class, so the Crusades are only mentioned in the first chapter, but also in this, these are defensive war that are really just part of the Reformation of Europe into its purest extent, where these are violently Islamophobic texts in order to create a narrative that the only good American is a white Protestant conservative Christian in a very specific mold. And so the Crusades are divorced from any kind of actually Catholic context. So you can make an argument about Americanness that focuses on a very singular vision. And since that vision doesn't exist, isn't real, and is based on nothing but violent bullshit, in order to achieve it, you have to do what they're doing, which are violent rallies to promote murder. It's also, it's the deport 100 million people, sign the crowd. That's from the DHS AI slop that they post on their Instagram account. It's like, this is specifically calling for the ethnic cleansing of, a fourth of the population of the United States, which would not be immigrants. It would be simply people of color in America.
Yeah.
These are all, anytime you talk honestly about the far right, you sound like a crazy person. Because you're following a rabbit hole down of the dumbest possible things, that the only thing that stops it from being farce is that the dream is bodies in the streets. And that's what they think about in the Crusades. These are a people who would make Emico of Floheim go home to not be associated with them, who also run our government.
Yeah.
And also have massive followings on social media, and can also rally strangers to show up in the hundreds outside of City Hall in Dearborn to make death threats. And the Crusades seem like something we shouldn't have to talk about, right? I never thought that this was going to be a thing that was going to keep being relevant and important. That's crazy, except for the fact that it serves the same purpose as the rest of nostalgia. It's that you want to do a thing that society thinks is weird and wrong and bad, so you have to make up a tradition to call back to, that we are returning to this thing we always did, even though we didn't.
Yeah. Yeah, and that the Crusades have that kind of really critical component of nostalgia, in that it's for the right wingers who are promoting it or trying to call it back into the present, is that it's an unjust loss, right? That they were unjustly wronged, that they should have won, that they were kind of subverted from the inside, and they're not going to be betrayed again, and they're going to kind of finish the job, right? And the connections too that we see, again, we shouldn't forget, you were mentioning kind of the Department of Homeland Security's kind of internet stuff. How many times have they used in their official communications medieval imagery, right? Defend the homeland, knighthood, guys in armor and crusader crosses on their chests and stuff like that. That's persistent. And so this neo-Nazi rally, it is not officially sanctioned, but it's part of the same thing. They're using the same rhetoric. It's part of the same kind of movement. The other thing I wanted to mention too, which the DoD textbook, which is, the textbook that's used in the new DoD class, which is independently published. It's published by a right-wing press, but one of the things that I was asked when I talked to one of the reporters about it was about their section on medieval Islam. And one of the things that I tried to point out at the time is that if you look at the rest of the textbook and the way that it talks about Christianity, it talks about the evolution of a Christianity in which there is kind of, it suffers at times, it makes mistakes, but it's ultimately the good guy throughout. But when it starts to, it introduces a section on holy war with jihad by talking about 9/11 and a 2023 terror attack. And then it jumps back, 1,300 years to the 7th century to show like, well, it's always been like that, right? And when you do that, you are making a contemporary political point because you're assuming, you're trying to tell the reader, you're not assuming, you're trying to tell the reader, it has always been like this, it will always be like this in the future, and therefore they have been and will be and continuously are our mortal enemies, us, the right-wingers say, the Christian West, against Islam, even those of our fellow citizens who live in a place like Dearborn, Michigan, and have for generations, right?
Yeah.
It's not good. So, all right. On that note,
I liked it better when we were talking about the cool convent and the archaeology. I just want to say I like that.
Yeah.
I like that part better.
Maybe next month, like we'll flip it and we'll start with the shit, and then we'll get kind of better along the way. I also think like next time, like, you know, as you guys know, I used to host this webcast, Drinking with Historians. I was like, maybe I just need to like have a glass of whiskey with me as I'm doing this in the afternoon.
It's 3 o'clock in the afternoon in Minnesota. So yeah, it's about time.
It is about time. That's right. Like if you were out on a boat, David, which you are oftentimes, like you would have a beer on your hand at this time. So we could just pretend.
One of the great things about fishing is you can start drinking at 8:30 in the morning, and it seems totally fine.
That's right. Maritime time. Like it just doesn't matter, right? Like you're on a boat, it doesn't matter. So anyway,
can I end with one piece of things that will make you two sad, even if the main audience won't necessarily know how bad it is?
Yay!
Yeah, the one for the high school. I know. Let you. I suffer, so you have to suffer with me.
That's okay.
DOD book is bad enough, right? Florida one.
Mm-hmm.
The author of it is the Victor Davis Hanson Chair in Classical History and Western Civilization at Hillsdale.
That makes me very sad.
That's
very sad.
Those are real words that I could string together. Yeah.
That guy sucks. Okay. All right. On that note, right, we do have to kind of cut off because we're kind of running out of time. Thomas and David, thank you so much for going on this journey with us. You know, there was a lot kind of there that we could have talked about kind of in addition, but I think we'll try not to end on such a downer kind of in the future, but I hope you'll be back next month. Thank you guys for joining us again. I think it's been a lot of fun.
Always.
Yeah. All right. Thank you guys for joining us. Thank you to our listeners for joining us on another episode of American Medieval. Stay tuned for more good content or mediocre content. I don't know, something like that on the podcast. And hopefully we'll see you again next week. Bye-bye. Thanks for listening to this episode of American Medieval, a proud member of the Multitude Podcast Collective. I'm your host, Professor Matthew Gabriele, and this episode was edited by Julia Schiaffini. The theme song to American Medieval is from the song Sleeping Bags by OTE. If you'd like to support the show, get ad-free episodes, be inscribed into the Book of Life for being a kind and generous soul, and get some other neat bonus stuff, please visit us at patreon.com/American Medieval. Thanks again for listening. See you all soon.